part of the occasion today is that you can have a look around the ship and familiarise yourselves with everything. We have tour guide leaflets, so you can do that independently, or I'm quite happy to walk around with you. So what I'm going to talk about today is a bit about Freshspring and make sure that people know about what we're doing, and we want people to come along like you have today and to learn more about the ship and maritime history. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to start off with the very early days. I mean, Earth's been here for 4 billion years, and man has only been around for 11,000 years, and so it's a tiny drop in the ocean. And so if this works, hopefully you can see that. Yep, that's a quinquereme. And quinqueremes were effectively warships, and they were built or developed during the 4th century before Christ. So you can see that man throughout his period on Earth was always very active on the water, and even by the 4th century BC, ships were looking relatively sophisticated. So carrying on from that, I'm going to jump in with a little poem, and it's a poem called Cargoes by John Masefield. He wrote it in 1903, and you might well have heard of him, and you might have heard of the poem, and you might be able to tell me the poem. So it starts off talking about the quinquereme. Quinquereme of Nineveh from distant Ophir, rowing home to haven in sunny Palestine, with a cargo of ivory and apes and peacocks, sandalwood, cedarwood and sweet white wine. Stately Spanish galleon coming from the isthmus, dipping through the tropics by the palm green shores, with a cargo of diamonds, emeralds, amethysts, topazes, and cinnamon and gold moidores. Dirty British coaster with salt cake smokestack, butting through the channel in the mad March days, with a cargo of tine coal, road rails, pig lead, firewood, ironware, and cheap tin trays. So what the poem's telling us is that the nature of shipping changed from conflict to support of our lives, and the steamship, which was the most significant driver of world trade and world history, was the ship that brought the world together. And for the first time ever, steamships were able to sail from one place to another in a relatively reliable fashion. And so that actually was the first phase of what we call globalization. So in terms of the development of the steamship, the sail hung on until the 1930s, and the ships then were really confined to trades such as grain and hang on a minute. I only wrote this morning because I realised that you wanted a little bit of history, so I thought I'd better get my skates on. And so the grain trade was where loading was relatively slow, and so ships were hanging around a lot. And the same with the nitrate trades from Chile. The ships were hanging around a lot, so they were only real, for large sailing ships, they were the only real trading routes that remained viable right through the 30s. Steamships weren't designed to wait for long periods, because all the time they were sat around, they were burning coal. And so they needed to keep moving, and so they were focusing on the more lucrative and more speedy trades. The last person to effectively operate sailing ships was Gustav Ericsson, a Swedish person, a Norwegian person, who actually owned something like 300 ships. However, he bought his ships at scrap rates, and he was so keen to make them pay that he halved the crews. And so people on those ships really had to struggle to survive. So much so, he was saving money that he even instructed them to sail without navigation lights to save oil. So you can imagine the conditions on these late sailing ships must have been pretty appalling. And so during this period, steam was gathering momentum. So steam started, in reality, steam on the sea, that is, in 1807, when a chap called Robert Fulton ran a steamship from New York to Albany and back again. And he called it the North River Steamboat of Clermont. It took passengers and covered 300 miles in 62 hours. So this is a tremendous move in the right direction. So moving on from that, 1822, Aaron Manby became the first iron, it was named after its builder, by the way, became the first iron steamships to put to sea. She crossed the English Channel in 1822, carrying passengers and freight at an average speed of 8 knots. And so you can see that even in that period, 1822, they were starting to get a move on. In 1838, the Cirrus left Ireland with 40 passengers for a historic voyage to New York. It took 18 days. And during that period, she ran out of coal. And so they resorted to burning the cabin furniture and even the ship's mast. But at least they got there. And the Cirrus became the first passenger ship to cross the Atlantic using steam power. So moving on, our great hero, I hope, Brunel, who built the Great Western, wooden steamship, she left Bristol 4 days after the Cirrus, and she arrived in New York only 4 hours later than the Cirrus. However, she still had 200 tons of coal in her bunkers, and her passage took 14.5 days. So this is an indication of how advanced people like Brunel were in terms of really pushing the boundaries of steam power. So again, by 1840, Cunard's RMS Britannia began a regular passenger and cargo service between Liverpool and Boston. So again, things become regularised now. In 1847, the Great Britain, the great ship that's in Bristol, which is amazingly preserved, became the first iron-hulled screw ship. And to cross the Atlantic. In 1835, she carried 630 people to Australia. 1847, it's not very long after the first little boat going down the river from New York. So in 1881, the first major ship to be powered by a triple expansion engine went into service, and the Navy followed with HMS Victoria as the first battleship to use a triple expansion engine. The Navy had converted entirely to steam power, and the age of sail was over. With the triple expansion engine and condensers, which Freshspring has, all introduced in the 1880s, the reciprocating engine steamship had reached the pinnacle of its performance and economy, and was now capable of travelling from one side of the world to the other without having to refuel with coal or even water, because they were using the water over and over again. Incidentally, Brunel never used a condenser, even though his father invented it. He preferred to use seawater, and seawater was terrible because they had to stop the close the boilers down every few days and dig the salt out. So after 150 years, the decline of the steamship started, and this was around the Second World War. And by the 1960s, the age of steam was over. And so again, the development of the diesel engine ship really meant the end to the steamships that were the mainstay of world transport. So only a few hang on. And in real terms, there are 3 in this country two, in fact, I was just counting us, but we're not operational. The paddle steamer Waverley and the SS Shield Hall in Southampton. They're the only 2 seagoing ships left in this country. Freshspring, however, has the potential to go back to sea, and she'll make the 3rd. And she is particularly special in the sense that she represents those small coasting steamers with the salt cake smokestacks that were crucial to trade around this country. I always liken them to the Ford Transit van. Once it's done its job, you take it to the scrapyard, and hence nothing survives like this ship. They've all been scrapped. So let's move on a little bit now to talking about this ship. So going back a little bit, here's a typical example of the sort of ships that traded around Britain. And what you see on the left-hand side is the Devonia, wooden steamship operated in the Bristol Channel, and regularly ran from here to Bristol, to the ports of the Bristol Channel. She went out to Lundy, she took cattle out, brought them back. Just a little regular coastal steamer. However, she was mined in the Second World War and sank. So that was the end of her. On the right-hand side, you can see the Crowpill. Crowpill, interesting little ship, built in 1911 as a coasting steamer, and she ended up in Bridgewater carrying coal from South Wales to the port of Bridgewater right up until 1966. And in August 1966, she was the cellophane factory turned to oil fueling, and so the little ship was destined for the scrapyard. And so the Crowpill sailed to Barry, where she was broken up. And then we see here, we see the Depression. This was after the First World War, the Great Depression. There were steamers everywhere. They were all laid up all over the place. And this is, in fact, the River Torridge with a picture from Instow. And there were over 30 steamers laid up in the River Torridge at the time. And it was particularly popular because it was classed as a free port, so they didn't have to pay anything. And these steamers came and went over the period, and eventually either went for scrap or went back into service. So moving on, you can see on the left-hand side there's a picture of the Carmine Philomena, another ocean-going steamship. She ran into Lundy in 1937 with a cargo of coal for Genoa, and although you can see she's in steam here, she became a total loss. And parts of the Carmine Philomena were plundered and actually used in hotels around Barnstable. She's still there today, and odd bits of coal are still being recovered from her. So on the right-hand side, we have Freshspring. She's the survivor. She's the one that represents all these vessels. She's the only one. She's got all those attributes of all those ships from 1880, the surface condenser, converting the steam back into usable water, triple expansion steam engine, the ultimate in the reciprocating steam engine history. Exactly the same if you went on an early steamship or you went on this ship. If you went right back to the turn of the century, SS Robin in London, late 19th century, you could walk around Robin and you'd think it's the same ship. She'll never go in the water again, but she's a static exhibit. So what we've got here is a little ship that was built in 1946. And she's still here. She's exactly like the ships that went before her in the sense that she was an antique almost as she was built. Because the Royal Navy, when war broke out, ordered from a little yard in Lytham, near Preston. They ordered 14 of these. They couldn't be bothered to redesign a ship for this mundane task of taking distilled water out to warships. So they dusted off the drawings from the First World War and said, we'll have another 14 of these, please. And so even when Freshspring was launched, she was an antique, effectively, along with all her sisters, first being launched in 1939. So obviously, Freshspring is the only survivor. Many of them were blown up. They were used as target practice. Some were sent to scrapyards, but here we are, Freshspring. So what you see here is Freshspring in Malta, which was her first port. She sailed directly from Lytham to Malta. And if you're interested, she used 43 tons of coal. Economical ship, pretty good going from all the way from Lytham to Malta. And here she is alongside an aircraft carrier providing demineralized water. So you might ask, why do they need that water? Well, the warships of the era were all steam. Steam turbine engines, very efficient boilers, what they call water tube boilers, so the water's inside the tube, not outside it. But they needed very, very pure water because they could not afford to be fighting a battle and then finding out the tube's clogged up with silt. Hence these little steamships. And these little ships followed the Navy wherever they went. Remarkably, they were all built to the highest standard, Lloyd's 100A1, as ocean-going vessels. So this little ship effectively could cross the Atlantic legally. So when we, this is where we come in really. When we found Freshspring, she was a wreck. And on the left you can see the latter days of her existence in Bristol, where she was privately owned. She was sold out of the Navy in 1977, bought by a Bristol businessman with all sorts of grand plans for her future, none of which came off. And on the right hand side you can see Freshspring as she was in the breaker's yard at Newnham-on-Severn. And there she is on the tidal River Severn, where she languished for 20 years because the scrap man couldn't bring himself to cut her up. He just really liked the little ship, so he was always doing other jobs and thinking, I'll do this tomorrow. And the reason it all happened for us was that there was a little article in a magazine. It was a single paragraph, and it said, historic steamship to be broken up at Newnham-on-Severn. So I thought, well, I'd like to have a look at that. So I got on my motorbike, went over, saw the owner of the scrapyard, and I could see he was quite passionate about the little ship. And so we discussed her future. And he said to me, so well, if you feel you can save this ship, you can have her for £1. If you fail, I want her back. So obviously I didn't give him £1 there and then because I quite enjoy having a house. But the fact is, you know, it was a precursor to this charity being put into existence. So there's Freshspring alongside in the River Severn, and one of the things we're probably all aware of is that it has the second highest tides in the world. And so the 40-foot Severn bore would hit Freshspring, lift her physically off the bottom, and you can see her there just being buffeted, and then drop her back down again, usually on a pile of rubble or rocks and things. So all of the time she was being really battered and damaged by these tides. So it was a last chance for this little ship, the last chance. So we were really fortunate in that we started a little trust in 2013 and decided we'd do something about this little ship. And so we got a few, well, I suppose I could say I cajoled a few unfortunate people to join me. But anyway, we did. We started, and we got the Director of National Historic Ships over, And for the first time ever, he said, my goodness me, this ship is equal in history to the Great Britain. And so he valued this ship that highly. And it was his backing that enabled us to a funder called the National Heritage Memorial Fund. You might have heard of them. And they are set up to preserve memorials from the First World War, Second World War conflict. And they determined that Freshspring, far from being the Ford Transit van, was a hugely important little vessel during this, not Freshspring herself, because she's post-war, but her class of ships were hugely important in keeping the fleet mobilised. They followed the fleet, they supported them, they provided salvage services. So if a ship's in trouble, they go out and pump the water out. If a ship's on fire, they go and fight fires, because they're set up for all of that. So really important little ships. So we got £155,000 to save Freshspring. And that was the turning point. There's no way she's going to go to the scrapyard after that. So we took her across to Sharpness, the shipyard there. And we had the ship surveyed, because bearing in mind, you know, she'd been languishing for years. She hadn't been in a dry dock for over 40 years. So we could have still had a pile of scrap. But we got the surveyors in, and they determined that she was a tough little ship, and having survived all the awful things in the Bristol Channel, she was still pretty sound. And so the money we got was to effectively patch her up, nothing else, just make the bottom seaworthy. So we put 105 square meters of steel around the bottom. And what you can see here is the first thing they had to do was to pressure wash the whole ship using a pressure of 30,000 pounds per square inch, not your garden pressure washer. And that took all of the rust off, all of the paint off, and blew hundreds of holes in the hull in the meantime. So it told us what it was like. It also cleaned the ship back to bare metal. And we then, you can see here, you can see the plates being put on. A lot around the waterline, of course, because that's where wind and water causes the most corrosion due to the oxygen content, and also under the boiler room, because the coal was corroding because she was originally coal-fired. The ash was actually corroding from the inside as well. So once we'd finished, we had Freshspring, from the hull point of view, looking really good. You know, we had the hull repaired, we'd had it blasted off, we'd had it repainted black. So we were ready to come back to Devon, and very kindly Came Lift, a local tug company. You might have seen their ships. Severn Scimitar is the tug that's up here around at the moment. They decided they could tow us here for nothing. And that was worth well over £20,000 to us. And also it was a great thing for the funder to see this match funding coming from a local company. So we, forevermore, have been grateful to KML for supporting us. And what you see here is the Severn Sea, the tug, towing Freshspring away from Sharpness and bringing her down to Devon. And there's Freshspring arriving in the River Torridge for the first time. That was August 2016. And we brought her up because of the tides and clearing the berth here. We got her up here in October of that year. So the next thing was that we had to start work on the superstructure because nothing had been done. And so it was a major job to really galvanise a group of volunteers, bring people in and really crack on with getting the ship looking respectable. And that's what we did. And there's a typical picture of some volunteers there. They're scaffolded around the funnel, which was again donated. The interior of the ship, which you hopefully will see, is pretty much as it should be. We've continually worked to make sure that it looks as though the sailors have just jumped off. And what we're able to do now, like today, is to hold events on board to help us with the essential funding that we need to keep the project running. And here we have a group, shanty group called the Plucketeers, who've been on here twice now. Both times have been a sellout and hugely successful. Great place for shanty bands, and we've got 2 more bookings this year. So again, we're starting to use the ship now for much more engagement with people locally, and that's really bringing her into the hearts of local people. So she's actually becoming part of the environment, which is really important because we so need local support. So we're out and about all the time, and you might have seen me on the little steam engine going around giving kids rides. We do that as much as we can, and that is increasing awareness. It's also helps us with raising money, mostly getting children involved in learning about engineering, because that's our key. That's our key. On day 1, when we decided we were going to save Freshspring, we also decided if we didn't save Freshspring, we were going to continue as an education charity. So our key objective is education. Is getting people into engineering, getting young people into careers at sea. So this has boded really well for us as a charity because it's enabled us to move ourselves forwards with a very straightforward objective, which most funders actually really like because they love to see that you're actually making a difference to young people's lives. So here's a typical day with young people on board. What we're doing here is we're showing them drawings of the ship. So talking about how the ship was made. How do you build a ship? Where do you start? You start with a design. In the old days, you start with paper drawings, blueprints and all that. And then you'd start working around those to build yourself a ship. The other thing we do, which is really important, is we go into schools. We have a primary school project which is mainstream. And what you see here is a very, very high quality piece of kit. And we have 9 of these that we take around to schools. And a school can have this for half a term or a term. And it comes with a lesson plan, 6 lesson plans, which you can see stacked up behind there. And it's all the principles of engineering in terms of machinery. So it's looking at rotary to reciprocal, why the use of cams, the use of pressure, and kinetic energy and work. So these were built at Whitelands, just across the river. And they were funded by the University of the West of England, believe it or not. And they determined this project so important that they funded it. And the reason they funded it is because they want students, they want engineering students, they want people to go forwards. In the same way as we're now supported by Harlan and Wolff, they want apprentices, they want young people. Careers in engineering are fantastic, and it's about time that everyone really realised that they are fantastic, because without engineering, we're nothing. So that's our main focus. I don't want to sort of bang on about that, but it's really important. And if anyone's got a school that wants this kit, just let us know, because we'd be delighted. And it's no cost. It doesn't cost anything. It comes with all the lesson plans. All the teacher has to do is open the envelope and off they go. I mentioned that the ship was Lloyd's registered earlier on, and so all the parts of the ship, and that's just a typical example of one connecting rod, is stamped with the Lloyd's stamp. That means it's all been approved. So that's a demonstration of how much detail Lloyd's went into when they were assessing the quality of a ship for its determined use. So the major project that we had when we first came down to Bideford, the wheelhouse was not existent because it was wood and it was gone. There was nothing there. It was just a wooden frame. So we were supported by Bideford Bridge Trust, fantastic organisation, very much supporting local people, who paid to have a new wheelhouse constructed for Freshspring. Tremendous project, and you can see it actually being made here. You can see the space up here where the wheelhouse goes, just being cleared. You can see the lorry delivering the wheelhouse, and the wheelhouse was delivered complete, just laying on its back. And Nick Sampson is, again, one of our heroes. He provided all his help at no cost. So he sent this massive lorry all the way down to Truro to pick up the wheelhouse, brought it back. There it is, sat on the quay, ready for loading. There it is, flying through the air. And again, Nick supplied the crane. So, you know, that's worth an awful lot of money, because he had to lift this thing over all the trees. There's the wheelhouse coming down, and there's the wheelhouse landing in place, and there's the finished job. So what you can see there, that was the biggest single transformation of this ship, in the sense that we now had a structure which was original. I mean, incidentally, it's classed as original because we used quite a few bits of old wood on it. Okay, so volunteers are key. Totally and utterly key. This ship would not be what she is today without volunteers. And one of the great things about volunteers, and this is something for all of us to remember, is they get younger. Okay? People come on here sometimes with very little motivation, very little self-esteem, not very interested in much. Within a short while, they're like human dynamos. They've transformed into different people. We now have a ship's band, volunteers, people who in the past maybe plucked a guitar or were in a band, and amazingly how many people were in bands. And now we have our own band. They're called the Bar Boys, and they perform professionally. They're just about to overtake the Fisherman's Friends, by the way, so if you want autographs, just make sure you get on with it. So here they are putting the boat deck back together. There's the boat deck, which you'll see up here, coming together nicely. And this picture is actually my favourite, because 2 years ago, Harlan and Wolff took over the shipyard just down here. So within a week of them taking it over, I was actually outside the gate. And I said, I want to see the manager. So they said, all right, we'll see if he'll see you. Went in. I came out with Freshspring booked in for 4 weeks later, which was quite a shock because I was asking him for a year later. But he said, if you come in, if you can get the ship down here in 4 weeks, we'll do you a special deal. And indeed he did. And indeed sorry?
Was that Tom Hart?
No, Tom wasn't even there. No, it's Dave Price, who ran the yard before Tom. So we managed to get our good old friends, Kenville Moore Lift with the tug to tow us to the shipyard. We were put in the big building because there was nothing there. They had nothing going on. They only had 20 staff. We booked in for 2 weeks. We were in there for a month, which was a dream come true for the volunteers because they had their ship in a shed. And so it was remarkable. We just transformed the ship in no time at all. And the guys at Appledore were amazing. They absolutely did everything. They just bent over backwards to make sure it was a great success. And we've been really good friends with the yard, and including the managing director who authorised all of this ever since. And in fact, you might, if you go to the book festival, you listen to Tom Hart speaking, you'll see he'll mention Freshspring. That's because we were the first ship, Harlan and Wolff in Appledore. So great way to start a relationship with a new shipyard. And of course, Freshspring came out absolutely looking like a new pin. She was just beautiful. So in terms of where are we going with all of this, clearly our strapline is preserving the past to inspire knowledge for the future, equals we want young people to aspire to future careers. So we're looking at all sorts of alternatives in terms of how we restore this ship. We're looking at, as we already are, we're completely independent of the mains. All of this is coming from the sun. We have solar, we have wind. We're upgrading the wind power at the moment. We plan to look at hybrid drive. We're always going to keep the steam, but if we can move the ship more economically from one place to another, that's certainly what we'll do. And there's a typical hybrid drive system. It's basically a bolt-in kit that you actually you put in the shaft so you can drive the ship electrically. So in terms of other projects, this mast here was entirely built by our own team, who had never done anything like it in their lives. And what you see here is the tree, kindly donated by Lord Clinton from one of his woodlands. And the first thing they did was square the tree into a square block. And what you see here is the gang sitting on the square block that was delivered. So that's how this mast started. And it took over a year and a half, because every week we turned it over and poured more linseed oil on it. And so it seasoned. And then the job then was to, on the left you can see Pete finishing off the mast. So he literally turned that square block into a really beautifully rounded timber mast. And then on the right, I mean, clearly teamwork is one of the key elements of what we do, is the mast being readied for stepping. And again, Nick Sampson came along and with his crane and put the mast in. And there you see the mast in place. And again, each one of these steps is such a significant improvement to the way the ship looks and the way she will be. So this is the mast for the future. And what's really remarkable about it, it's been up here for about 3 years now, and there's not a single shake in it. It was so well made. The awning that we're sitting under now, we raised money by crowdfunding. The interesting thing about it is that the ship had an awning, and the awning was exactly the same height as this awning. And it was more for sun than rain, but she did have an awning, and all the fittings are still here. So we're not changing the appearance of the ship, we're just utilising that appearance and trying to keep within the scope. Hence the awning is quite a flat structure, so it doesn't affect the overall look of the ship. But it's meant that we can do things like today, which is absolutely tremendous. The other thing we're really doing now, we're working very intensively with the University of the West of England and a company called BMT Global as partners to create virtual reality. So we actually now deliver virtual reality, usually on a Sunday, where people can come along and they can actually get involved in seeing, with headsets on, seeing how the ship worked, listening to the crew speaking. And we're continually working on this to the point where it will become interactive, where people will actually be able to drive the experience and even the ship. So that's really great. And this is our, to inspire for the future a bit, is to make sure that we are at the cutting point of technology in terms of what we can deliver to young people. And we're also now partnering with Petrock College. Indeed, a senior member of the team there is now one of our trustees. So we're really partnering with Petrock, who are developing very positively in terms of the university experience. So there's Freshspring as she sits now. That's our general impression of how she will operate or look as a passenger ship. Not much changed, but with a deck saloon where we're sitting today. We've just had a feasibility study conducted which has indicated that Freshspring can carry passengers, and that's under the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency control. That's a huge step for us because that study cost us £54,000, and it was funded by the Lottery Heritage Fund because they're our partner too. And they've worked with us all the way through this project to ensure that we keep going. So one of the really crucial things was to understand, can this ship ever make itself pay? Can it carry people? And the answer is yes, it can carry people. So we're always looking for volunteers. So you can join Team Freshspring at any level. I mean, I'm a volunteer. In fact, I'm more a slave than a volunteer. But don't let that put you off. It's not a quinquerim. So volunteering is great fun. We can volunteer at all sorts of levels, you know, from an hour a week helping with administration to getting involved on the ship, getting involved in events, getting involved in opening the ship. Really important part of this job is actually being here on a Sunday to open the ship to the public. Great job, stewarding. Yeah, what can we offer you? I mean, we offer you, you know, also we have a great magazine, which I see some of you have picked up copies of. So that's our quarterly magazine. We have events for volunteers. Obviously, you can come on free. Members, I mean. So becoming a member of the trust is really helpful. I mean, it's really helpful to us, obviously, because we really rely on the membership fees to keep us going from day to day. So if you have a mind, please have a think about joining us, and the forms are just over there. The most important thing with volunteers is that they have fun. And do you know, even through COVID, we didn't lose volunteers because we changed round to a support charity, making sure that everybody's all right. Most people come along and say, we lost our volunteers. Well, the fact is you have to look after people, make them feel wanted, make every job feel like the top job. Doesn't matter what it is. So last year, we took volunteers to the Shield Hall in Southampton. And there's Lou, one of our volunteers, who's having a great time actually steering the Shield Hall. And I think that's the sort of thing, you know, it's about why do this? It's so much payback. Apart from just the teamwork. So there we are. Become a member if you have a mind to. As far as the rest of the afternoon, obviously we've got tea and coffee here. So please have a tea or a coffee, I won't be a moment, and then afterwards, or at any point you like, just have a wander around the ship. And we're very happy to answer any questions that you might have. So before I just sort of close this, does anybody like to ask a question?
Trawling talk, you didn't mention in the progression from sail to steam the Warrior, which of course combined the steam and the sail. And my great-grandfather was, when he first joined the Royal Navy in the 19th century, was a stoker who went aloft, which I can't imagine as being a more ghastly way to earn a crust or a shilling in the King's Navy or the Queen's Navy.
Well, indeed, he was a lucky man, and the HMS Warrior was the secret weapon of the 1850s. And she never fired a shot in anger. She was so far advanced that she scared everyone off. She didn't have a long history, but she was propelled by steam, and indeed the propeller could be lifted. Not only could the propeller be lifted, but the funnel could disappear. So to all other vessels, just another sailing boat, let's get ourselves lined up. Next thing, up funnel, up smoke, Warrior is in line. She also had guns that could traverse around the deck, so that she wasn't a cannon pointing out the side, she could fire ahead. Anyway, I don't want to go back to Warrior, but your relation was indeed lucky, because the difference between a stoker and a person up aloft was profound. The stoker's job was pretty awful. So I'm sure when he was said up the loft, old chap, he was up there like a rabbit, you know, yeah, right off a train pipe. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Are you involved with STEM? As no other hand.
STEM? Who said that? Me. Oh, you, right. Science, technology, engineering, art, and maths.
No.
STEAM. So art is now.
STEM.
Yeah, it means
science,
technology, engineering,
maths.
So STEM is now STEAM.
Is it?
Because A for art has now been introduced as a STEM subject, which is great news, because Brunel was an artist, you know, and if you look at Victorian engineering, it's art. So, of course, we're involved in STEM. We're deeply immersed in STEM. Everything we do is STEM. All our school projects are STEM. Our university projects are STEM. So it's a part of, it's it's, you know, you could have called us the Steamship Freshspring, but there we are.
How many crew were on this ship?
When the ship was launched, she was coal-fired and she carried 14 crew. So they had they had been on here for maybe 2 or 3 months, something like that. So the ships had to be fully livable. And with coal firing, of course, you needed a rotation of crew because it was very manual. You know, they'd be shoveling something like 12 tons a day. When it was converted to oil in the 60s, they actually took 4 bunks out because they didn't need those people. There was just a single person in the boiler room. Okay, anyone else?
Okay.
All right.
How young does your project that goes to school, how young does that cope with?
Yeah, we started about 8 years old, and we work with primary schools at all sorts of levels, but we do projects with secondary schools and obviously with the universities. So we start at a level where kids can really become hands-on, you know, and they really do. They really love it, particularly our STEM project.
Touche.
What are your plans for the future?
Okay, so given that we've just achieved this study, which is determine can Freshspring sail as a passenger ship, this has meant that the ship is not destined to be a museum forever. It means she's got a future. And so the way forwards now is we're doing what they call a governance review, because what we've got to do is to make sure that the governance of the charity is strong enough to manage a very major project. And we're talking potentially between £3 and £4 million to actually put this ship into operation. And so we've got to be a good, strong trust. You know, we've got to have the right people on the board. We've got to be prepared to move forwards. All of this has been funded by the lottery, by the way, as has Kelly here, who's the audience development, funded by the lottery. Very crucial role, reaching out to people, getting more people engaged, looking at new opportunities, looking at education opportunities. And Sam, whose mum's here today, Sam Roberts, is actually our community learning officer, so she's out and about as well. But to answer the question, we've had a single objective in the sense of getting the ship operational, and that's what we're going to do. So all the work we do is moving towards that aim. So in terms of time, I would say we're looking at something like 4 years, 4 to 5 years. Yeah.
In the future, will Bideford stay the home port for the ship?
Yes, is the answer. I mean, it's a very difficult question, because if we look around now, tide's out. If you look at the Shield Hall in Southampton, it doesn't matter. If they want to sail at 10 o'clock in the morning, they'll sail at 10 o'clock in the morning. So we've got to factor in 2 things. How much do we value the volunteers? How much do we value more than 2 things. How much do we value the local support? And how much do we need to be somewhere where we can earn lots of cash? So it's a really difficult dilemma for us. But what we've done is we've done a viability study exclusively within the Bristol Channel. And what we found is that we can make Freshspring pay in the Bristol Channel. So things, because she's a very small ship in comparison to most, she can go up the Sharpness Ship Canal to Gloucester. So we can offer things that nobody else can do. And one of the things that people love doing is going on ships when they're not rolling around. So if we went up for a couple of months in the summer, Gloucester to Sharpness and back, we'd sell out. But we'd also earn enough money to bring her back here for her annual maintenance. Within the scope of that, when the tides are right, the ship will be here. So she'll run from here down to the Torridge, she'll run trips around, but also potentially up to Barnstable, because that's a really key part of There's actually an exhibition in the Guildhall in Barnstaple as we speak about the maritime history of Barnstaple. Well worth a visit. So it's really keeping this activity in the river alive.
Is the river deep enough? Well, it must be deep enough to get up to watch the old bridge.
The Barnstaple?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right,
I mean,
really
it's
realise
treacherous,
I've seen
it's dodgy, and there was a chap called Terry Grace who used to run sand dredgers up there. And also they used to run the sand dredgers, the Arco Tor and Tamar. They used to run up to Barnstaple. The only problem with Barnstaple is you've got to know your way. There's water, but it's just a very difficult channel. But it's possible. Oldenburg's been there several times. Freshspring isn't a particularly deep draft when she's not full of water. So that's a possibility. And also evening trips down the river from here.
So what number of people would you put on, say, an evening trip?
Yeah, I mean, what we're looking at is a license for 100 people. And that's relatively comfortable if you disperse people around the ship. We've got a small group here today, so it would be, it's making sure that you've got enough seating and you're not overwhelming people with space. So the Oldenburg, for example, carries 267 people, and she's not much bigger than Freshspring. So, there's an indication of the fact that, that there's plenty of space because we've got the decks above and we'll have accommodation below. Sue?
If everybody else's...
No, I've got a question.
Oh, fine, please.
I've got two questions, really. First one is, when you're up and running, will you run under coal steam power? I know it's not very eco-friendly, but it'd be so lovely.
We won't be coal. We'll never be coal. And this is a big debate at the moment, is, how does the heritage movement keep going now the last mine in South Wales, Phosphifan, has closed. And they're looking at all sorts of alternatives, including compressed olive pips. So there's all sorts of things going on to keep that movement moving. Within the main industry, most ships are operated using oil. So there's got to be a big step change in how ships are operated. One of the things they're looking at is hydrogenized vegetable oil, hydrogen being an element of that fuel, or even pure hydrogen. The great thing about a steam engine, and indeed every nuclear power station is a steam engine, is all you need is heat. With a diesel engine, you actually need specifically diesel fuel. Whereas we could run this ship on railway sleepers. You need heat. And so that's a really big plus, is as the alternatives in fuels develop, we can develop with them. So we work really closely with organisations that are developing new fuels. Because under our banner of inspiring for the future, we don't want to pollute. We want to be as environmentally friendly as possible. And we want to demonstrate this to young people. That's why we're 100% renewable energy on here today. It's that important.
Yeah, I absolutely get that. And at the same time, I think one of the things I love about steam power are the smells. And maybe I'm just lucky to have had those smells before it became obviously not very eco-friendly. And my other question was, I'm really interested, what's your background? How did you get into this?
Okay, so my background, perhaps not surprisingly, is engineering. I started off as an engineer with EMI. I did my training with EMI electronics, and then went into shipyards in Portsmouth because I didn't, I just didn't enjoy the electronics side. And then that was really how it all moved forwards. And then laterally, I've been involved in all sorts of projects around engineering. So a project called Green Power, which is taking STEM into schools using electric car kits, where young people could build a car, and they're two up at Bideford College, as a matter of fact, and then race them in proper races. And so this is a tremendous project. And then 12 years with an organisation which we set up called the Amber Foundation. And Amber was set up to help young people who are in prison, homeless, substance misuse, no aims, ambitions, no motivation. And there's a strange irony here. I'm sorry to keep on, just if you want to go home, please do. But the strange irony is that with Amber, I used to charter tall ships. And what I found was putting people on the water made the most profound difference to their lives. So we could put a gang of people who are on methadone trying to detox on a tall sailing ship. They'd scream and shout the first day. By the time they came back, they didn't want to get off because it was so different. They felt they had some responsibility. They felt alive. And so the strange irony, as soon as I saw Freshspring, I thought, on with the old plan. You know, Freshspring can actually do that. She can actually help people to understand the need for teamwork, the need that somebody's got to do the cooking, somebody's got to do the washing up, somebody's got to do the housework, all of those things. So Amber was probably the most important part of actually motivating the startup of this project from an initial visit. I don't know if I've gone on too long with that, but there are lots of things went on in between. But
a very quick one then, please, John. Have you managed to get Geoffrey Cox, because he's getting some access to this 400 million and Bideford is in line for a share of it. And it was he who kick-started the ministry back along to get Harland and Wolff to come to Appledore, and it wouldn't be there without them.
So one of the things about this charity is that we're ridiculously ambitious. So not so long ago, I had Geoffrey Cox on here talking about levelling up funding, because we are chosen as one of the 20 areas for the 400 million. Geoffrey Cox holds the purse strings for the Torridge district. So straight away, Geoffrey was on here. We talked about the levelling up funds. We also talked about Heritage Harbour status, the importance of Bideford, third biggest port in the country at one point. We also looked at how do we develop Bideford? How do we make it more focused on the past, focused on the water? We're looking at Heritage Centre, historic harbour. We're also looking at bringing more historic vessels into Bideford. And one of the vessels we're talking to at the moment is the Kathleen and May, which is languishing in Gloucester. So we're working, and so Geoffrey's on the team, he's the key to this, to get ships like the Kathleen and May back to Bideford. So can you imagine a row of historic ships along the waterfront here? What would that do to tourism? What would it do to our economy? You know, it's what our young people, it's really important. And to say boring you, this is the James Craig. In January, or in December and January, I went to Australia and I met this team, and they have a fleet of heritage ships and they run them as a cluster. So they run them all as one. And by doing that, it means you become more efficient at running ships. So it's about looking at how you move it forward. But anyway, I'm sorry with these really long answers, but the answer is absolutely, we're in touch with all of the key people. And just to go on once more, the government has actually set up now, through the Heritage Lottery and the National Heritage Memorial Fund, a study particularly focusing on maritime heritage and its importance in this country. First time ever, the status of maritime heritage is absolutely rocketing. Not surprising, because we're an island nation, and so it should be. But so many ships have been lost and scrapped over the years, or even exported, like the HMS Adelaide, fabulous ship built in this country, now in Adelaide, of course. But, you know, it's all these things that we need to be looking at to really embrace our maritime heritage. You must all really be fed up by now. So thank you very much for coming along. Please have a cup of tea. yeah, please have a cup of tea, and please feel free just to wander around the ship as you like. Okay, so thank you ever so much for today.
Thank you.